when I die, I'm not afraid that they're going to say in the heavenly court, why weren't you as great as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or for us, they would say, why weren't you Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, someone like that? I'm afraid they're going to ask you, why weren't you Zebi? Why weren't you Daniel? Why weren't you the best version of you?
Welcome, Daniel Bortz, aka the Millennial Rabbi, a friend of mine. Thank you for joining us here at Seekers of Unity. Daniel, would you please introduce yourself to our audience?
My friend, it is so good to be on here. I've been watching this channel. It's one of my favorites. Always a pleasure speaking to you. As you said, my name's Daniel. I grew up in San Diego, California via Cape Town, South Africa. And I lived a normal California existence. My family started to get a little more into Judaism as I grew up. So I had the foundation stone of our heritage, but I went to public school. I kind of went off the path. And when I was around 16, 17, I started to feel a strong spiritual connection. And I decided to explore that connection through the lens of Torah and Judaism as I learned more about it. And if you fast forward a good 20 years, I'm a rabbi now working around the world virtually and locally in California primarily to help others find that connection that I found in my teen years.
Nice, very cool. That's a very succinct and beautiful introduction. And we're going to link, you're very active on social media. You've been called one of the most influential rabbis, young rabbis on social media. So we're going to post links to all that in the description, of course. People can go check out your incredible work, which is approaching, I think, the same themes that we're approaching from another angle. And we need many people tackling these themes from all angles. Why I'm particularly interested in your work and why we're having this conversation here today is because you are very involved in what you call, and a term that's been coined as experiential Judaism. I think your slogan on your social media handles is experiential Judaism for this generation. And I think that's a really, really fascinating topic. I want to ask briefly what you see going down on the scene today in terms of experiential Judaism. And I think that what we're going to talk here in Judaism is really going to be applicable to a universal audience. It's going to be the facts on the ground, maybe from our own Jewish vantage point, but as we know, everything that we do here at the channel is universal in scope, and religion is a human phenomenon, universal. It's not unique to Judaism. So I want to know, firstly, what are you seeing in terms of experiential Judaism and Jewish practice today, where it engages with a real contact with the real, sort of what we may call a real religious experience, some kind of mystical experience, perhaps. And then we're going to only speak about that briefly, we decided, and we're going to speak more about the philosophical and religious implications, the theological implications of mystical religious experiences. What role do they play? Are they necessary? What's their role in contemporary forms of religion? Do we need them? Do we not need them? Is there too many? Is there not enough? And we here at the channel, Seekers of Unity, our slogan is a philosophical exploration of mysticism. So this is going to be a philosophical exploration of mysticism meets an experiential practice of Judaism, and that's what we hope to get into. So please tell us about what you're seeing today, and plus the work that you're involved in on that front.
Woo! I love it. This is what I live for. This is soul food right here. I love this. When I had my personal spiritual experience, I came to a love for this being, for this source of this feeling that I attributed to God. And yes, I decided to go to yeshiva in Jerusalem and study all day long Talmudic law and study. But if I were to be honest with somebody, I had zero interest in studying. My desire for studying was that I'd come to the conclusion that the way that I can manifest this love for this being is through studying. I don't want to say I'm very against, putting a gender to God, but it was studying his, for lack of a better word, his diary, his Torah, his book that he wanted me to study. This was the way I learned, was the way to connect to this being objectively. It wasn't just about my emotional feelings sitting all day and just crying out in love for God. It was about manifesting that through what I was asked to do, which was Torah and mitzvot. But I found in general in the Jewish world, and maybe this is true in other religious sects, is a lot of it was an intellectual side. A lot of, you go to a synagogue, you go to places of study around the world, and you're usually going to spend most of your time sitting in a class. You're going to be learning. The the personal spiritual experience, the emotional side is generally a personal thing. Hopefully you're feeling that somewhere. We're not going to dictate that to you. And that bothered me a little bit because, when I look back to the times of the temple days, I look back to the times of, the biblical period that we read about, it was very experiential. It was very, you're walking barefoot up the mountain to Mount Moriah overlooking Jerusalem with incense smell smoking. There were Levites singing with different instruments playing. It was visually unbelievable. There were miracles happening. You had prophets. You could walk to a prophet. We know prophecy was commonplace because King Saul, when he lost his sheep or goat, it says he looked for a prophet to find out where it was. So it was almost like a practical thing in the times of Israel, that you wouldn't even have to go, something as simple as finding a lost object, you would go to the prophet for guidance. So we used to live in a time that was extremely inspirational, was extremely experiential. And, I look at our landscape today, and for our young generation, we've got music festivals. We've got lots of yoga. We've got lots of experiences that we can go to that could be much more appealing than sitting in a class. Not to say that a class can't be made into an experience, which is the classes I love the most. But I felt like our generation needs more of that in going back to the way it was and finding powerful experiences within our faith and not just keeping it intellectual. I could build off that, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think you've really opened up a good overview of the conversation in many ways. So let me begin with the historical point that you brought up, and then let's bring it back to the present. I like that point that you say that we think about religion today as it is today, but we have a bit more of a broad perspective that can come with studying history. We could see sort of patterns and cycles and earlier forms and models of religion. And when it comes to Judaism, anyone who studies a bit of Jewish history knows that there was what's known as the temple cults, where there was a lot of experience. That was, at least from the narratives of the tradition itself, there's prophets, there's inspiration, there's music in the air, there's the encounter with the divine, there are the miracles that are happening in the temple, at least from within the self-conception of the people experiencing that and recording those things. And then somehow with the destruction of the temple, which apropos we just commemorated yesterday, 2 days ago, Tisha B'Av, there's a transition from sort of this temple-based Judaism, which is very experiential. People come to the temple to see and be seen, to see the divine and to be seen by it. There's this encounter that happens, and then transition to what's known as like a book-based religion, right? Where the Bible and the Talmud become the replacement of the temple. And in that sense, there's a transition from experience to study to scholarship. And I think that's a very well put point, that historical trajectory. I'm curious to know, what do you think is happening today in 2021? And I could talk to all kinds of old scholars. I can talk to all kinds of librarians and researchers and PhDs, but I'm talking to you because you are the man on social media. You're the putting together events. You're putting together Shabbats in Coachella. You really, I think, know perhaps more than anyone what's happening today in terms of actual experiential Judaism. So let's talk for a minute about what's happening today and the work you're involved in, and then zoom back to the sort of historical, philosophical, theological discussion.
Yeah, I think the most successful outreach movements like Chabad and others don't get bogged down in the intellectual or the emotional. They come straight with love, like Abraham did. Like, if you want to go back in time, Abraham would have deep philosophical discussions with people in the desert, and he would also give them great food and drink. So I think that side of it, of welcoming and warmth, is really keeping Jewish connection alive and spiritual connection alive. Just simply giving a warm, open, accepting place, which is a new thing in Jewish history. Like, we're not worried about all the differences between us. Let's just make a beautiful place for all of us to gather and just talk. But I would say, in the broader scope of our generation, Jewish, not Jewish, religious, not religious, there is a bit of a push I'm noticing today about personal experience, about finding your own independent connection to your God or your spirituality. A desire and thirst for meditation, for movement, for different experiences that I think I'm trying to tap into. I think it's really like a push now. I don't know if it's the 60s all over again. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think technology is getting so intense. COVID is forcing us to move inward. It's forcing our generation to look a little more inward than we did before. And pay more attention to our wellness, pay more attention to our, our mind, body, soul. And I think that's really what I'm trying to tap into. When I do events, when I meet up with people, I'm really trying to show them the beauty of feeding their soul, that it's not something out there and crazy. It's actually something that is very, very needed and very, very applicable wherever you're at for our generation, is to really feed mind, body, and soul in our time.
Yeah, tell me. So let me maybe ask a pointed question. If I'm a young Jew living in 2021, what are the options? What are the availabilities? Is there experience? Is there religious experience happening in the world of religion? And I'm asking both in religious contexts, in secular contexts, in studious contexts, and sort of across the gamut, across Orthodoxy, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. Is that happening? And if it is, where do you see it happening?
I would say it's not happening much, unfortunately. I could name you pockets of places. There are a couple synagogues in New York, LA, generally not in the Orthodox world. And you do have some rabbis around the world that are teaching this and that are doing it. But I definitely feel like there's a big gap. And if you're a young person looking for that, you have to really search hard.
Well, I mean, sometimes things that are worth discovering are there for the search. Let us get philosophical here for a moment. And I'm going to kind of turn the tables on the assumption of what people may expect a podcast like this to be talking about. Most people may assume for us to sit here and bemoan and bewail the lack of mystical and spiritual experience in contemporary forms of religion, Judaism included. And that would all be par for the road. But what I want to ask is, and let's turn a critical eye here. Perhaps, is there a argument to be made against mystical religious experience? Is there? And defining those things may be a bit beyond the scope of this discussion. If you'd like to have a heuristic definition, we can go with that. But is there an argument to be made against them that you yourself indulge in? Is there a? I mean, I have some of my own thoughts, but I like to hear what you think about that.
Yes, I'm love Kabbalah and mysticism, as you know, and I'm self-critical, being aware if I don't go too far one direction. They say it's like if you only study mysticism and not the practical side and don't live the practical side of halacha of Judaism, it's like pulling flowers from the ground and enjoying the smell, but it's not rooted. It's not in a foundation. It will die away. I think the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, if I'm not mistaken, says that it's like looking into space and enjoying the stars and the moon and not noticing the pothole that's right in front of you. So I think about the four Tanaim, the four rabbis that went into the orchard in the Pardes, in Tractate Chagiga in the Talmud. It's one of the few very mystical passages in the Talmud. And it says that four of them went up into heaven, meaning they meditated. They meditated and reached heavenly places. And one went crazy, one died in rapture, one became a heretic, and only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and he left in peace. And for Ben Zoma, it says that he went crazy, and it says that it brings a verse that he ate too much honey and he vomited. So this is not the most. I'm a huge fan. I believe it's vitally important for our generation, and Arizal felt this. Other mystics felt our generation desperately needs the power and the beauty and the magic that is in Jewish mysticism. It's not just something that is a nice addition. It is essential to our generation. So let's make that clear. But I would say that practically, one of the things to be worried about is that it makes you want to detach yourself from this world. And for good reason. I mean, this world has a lot of, we waste our time on all types of things. Well, detaching yourself is not the worst thing. But Hasidic teachings, Hasidus teaches us that our ultimate mission is to engage in this world. It's to somehow live the paradox, to bring the mystical side and infuse it into the practical. And I know at the beginning of COVID, I was studying a lot of Kabbalah, and part of me was like, I don't want to do social media anymore. I don't want to. I just want to go to Tzfat and study this stuff and meditate and see how far I can go, How far can I reach? How high can I go? And to be fair, most of the mystics describe that they detach themselves from reality, or I don't say reality because that's the true reality. They detach themselves from mundane affairs, and that was a big part of them reaching higher states. So there is a tendency, I feel like, to do that if you don't have the right intention, like Rabbi Akiva did, which was why did Rabbi Akiva leave in peace? Why was he the only one who made it out? Because his intention the whole time was to enter in peace. His intention the whole time was to take this incredible experience and bring it down into his daily living. That is the goal. That has to be the goal. And as long as you have that intention always when you're studying this stuff, I think you'll do well.
Yeah, I very much resonate with that idea that simple sort of mystical experiences can lead to escapism. They can lead to forms of spiritual egoism and Gnosticism, where it becomes about me and my own experience, my own blissful experiences, where it's not grounded and there's no intention to bring it back down to reality. And I think that idea from the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, who goes in peace, and I like that he goes in, peace is really perhaps not the right word for shalom. He goes in whole, he goes complete, right? He has a vision of what a complete world may look like, and he brings that vision back with him throughout.
By the way, I have to interject. He tells them, when you see the water, don't call it, when you see the marble, don't call it water.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get into it's a long discussion, but what you just said about wholeness is perfect, because why did Rabbi Akiva do so well? He said, don't differentiate between the spiritual and physical. Don't look at an angel and look and say, oh, where's God in all of this? Understand that this is all God's expression.
Right.
That is the key to all mystical experience, is not to ever make a separation between things. And that's why Acher became a heretic. It's a whole longer discussion, but I think whole is a perfect way to explain his mentality.
Yeah, no, that's a very great point. There's that emphasis there on the non-duality of the experience, and I think both Rabbi Akiva's warning and the description used, he cuts the shoots. There's an idea of cutting and separating, which is a Talmudic, idiom in general. But over here, I think it points to some sort of differentiating, separating between branches and roots. And I think it's actually for that very reason why I generally don't like to use the word. Only in very select usages do I use the word spiritual. And generally, I try to use the word mystical, because I think within the word spiritual, there's an implied duality between spirit and matter. And to be spiritual means to be a way to be transcend matter. And I think what mystical experience, mysticism may give us beyond spiritual or more than spiritual, is that it's about integrating the two, seeing them as not really as two separate things, as seeing them as two sides of the same whole.
And my aversion to spiritual, even though I use it a lot because it's kind of our generation's word, is that it's not always holy. I think holiness and spirituality are totally different things. In Judaism, to sit on a mountaintop in Nepal for 12 hours and meditate is not as holy as to slave away in a kitchen to make chicken soup for a sick person. There's something, holiness, spirituality was used by Bilam, who was a magician in the Torah who went against Moses and the Jewish people, but he was one of the most spiritual people of his time, if not more spiritual than Moses. So I also agree with you that it's a risky word.
Can you give us a working definition of holy?
I would say aligned with God's will. Could that be maybe selfless? Like you were talking about, how spirituality can be about you experience, which is important. You subjectively have to wrestle and come to a subjective experience with God, but the highest level is to lose self, and not to lose self because you're not, aware of your needs or who you are. You've reached that already, and now you're going past it's better to be a small piece of the infinite than to be the biggest finite piece there is. And I think that's what Moses reached. I think that's what every prophet reached. The Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Arizal, they learned a lot. They understood they used their mind to the utmost. They used their emotion to the utmost. And then, and by the way, I like that as an explanation for faith. Faith is not irrational. It's not like shutting down the mind and the heart and just believing in this great being. It's using your mind and heart to the utmost ability, and then having the humility to recognize that I, as a finite mortal being, can only reach a certain point. I will, now that I've reached my limit, I can now respectfully, I can say I am now subjugating myself to a higher place. It's supra-rational. It's understanding that the mind is not the highest place a human can reach. Now, by the way, I bet that goes against half the people you talk about, philosophers, and that the mind is not the highest place. But I think Carl Jung and others might agree that the mind reaches a certain limit.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely a lot of history metaphysics to be discussed of where exactly the mind, not just the human mind, but mind in general, reaches on sort of in the metaphysical schema. But maybe for another time. I want to dig into another philosophical point here, which is related to this, and this is something which I myself don't really have a clear answer on. So I'm curious to hear what you think about it. When we talk about experience, right? It's a contested term philosophically, and it's a term which became very important in the scholarship of mysticism. Just to give a bit of a background for those that don't know, mysticism, as it was during the Middle Ages when it flowers in most traditions, is really not so much focused on experience. They have a sense of veracity. There's a true message. There's an encounter, and there's actual commands, or there's actual propositions that derive from their experiences, which their focus is placed on. The focus away from theology or theosophy. We know this in the case of the Jewish mystics. When they're writing, they're not talking about their firsthand experiences. Very rarely do they ever, but they're writing about what's happening in higher celestial beings. They're writing about the angels and the shape of God and the shape of the world. That's what they're writing about. The shift to experience, as far as historians plot this change, happens after Immanuel Kant, during the sort of post-Enlightenment Romanticism, where it seems that religion, because of the attacks of modernity and because of Kant's separation of the noumena and the phenomena, which we don't need to get into here, seem to put the realm of religious truth out of bounds, and all that's left is the phenomena, is my own experience. Right? The basic idea is that the reality itself can never be reached because we're stuck behind our own interpretive lenses, but I can experience my own interpretive lens. I can experience my own experience. And people like Kant and Schelling and Schleiermacher very much shift the weight of religion into its experience. And that's taken up by William James, and that makes its way straight into like American thought, and that influences a lot of Western thinking about religion. Which is to say that it's not necessarily the case that religious experience deserves the centrality of place that it has today in religious discourse. And the reason why I give that introduction is to ask a critical question, which is perhaps I think that the notion of experience itself is a complex one when it comes to mysticism. Sorry for this long introduction to a question, because mysticism, as we've been saying, is predicated on this dissolution of all boundaries, all opposites, all dichotomies, all separation. It's just about an unfiltered unity and unmitigated oneness, right? So to have a notion of an experience implies that there is an experiencer, there's an experienced, and then there's an experience of those things. There's a separation here. There's a subject and an object, and there's something happening that can combine them, which is why in real philosophical texts of mysticism, Plotinus, the father of Neoplatonism, says that there is no such thing as a mystical experience. It only is reality as itself finally sort of unsheathed. So that's one kind of take on the mystical, where to even conceptualize it as an experience is a misunderstanding. You have a take on that?
I think in this week's Torah portion, we read about Moses is spending his last days exhorting, speaking to the Jewish people about what occurred over the last 40 years. And in today's Aliyah, today's Torah reading, and yesterday's, I believe, as well, Moshe says, V'yadata hayom v'shavos levecha ki Hashem hu Elokim einod. You know today, and you have been shown, that God is all there is none else. And what's interesting about that is the word to know, v'yadata. I don't know, maybe you can help me find in English a right term, because knowledge is not the idea. It says Adam knew Eve, right. Meaning knowledge in Hebrew is an intimate bonding with something. The Jewish people in the desert weren't just intellectually learning about God. They were shown to know. When they were given the Torah on Mount Sinai and God spoke to them, it was an experience of reality at that moment. And there was also truth in knowledge. It was in this week's Torah portion, Moshe tells them, has there ever been anything like this? Like, can you even compare this experience to anyone else? I'm intellectually showing you that this has to be the true path, because no one has ever done such miracles in the past. You have proof. You have actual proof. You don't have to believe in my word. You don't have to believe in 10 plagues. God spoke to you directly. But there was also the lightning and the thunder. There was also an emotional experience that occurred as well. There was a gravitas to it as well. There was an experience that occurred. So Kabbalah explains that via data, das means that you have your intellect, you have your emotions, but how do you connect your mind and your heart is through a soul faculty of dat, of knowledge. It is this indescribable, and it's pretty much what I dedicate my life to, is how do I help people bridge what they know in their mind or are thinking in their head to the emotions of their heart. And it's a skill. There's not one way to do it. Some people use music. Some people use meditation. A lot of times when you're able to close your eyes and just reach a place even higher than the mind, it allows the mind to connect to the heart, because that level of self, the keter, the highest part of your soul, is not limited by mind-heart duality. It's able to merge them all together. When you do that, you can bridge the two. It's the higher dot. But what I'm getting at is that this idea of like subjective and objective truth, I think ultimately it's the same thing. That if you can reach your higher subjectivity, not your low-level self of subjectivity, I like this, you like that, we're different, but you're able to reach the true I, you're able to shut down, close your eyes and shut down the noise of the outer racing mind. And as I think it was James Joyce who said, shut your eyes and see. That when the Jewish people, when we say the Shema 2 times a day minimum, morning and night, and we close our eyes and we say God is one, we're closing our eyes because we are reaching a place of truth where I'm connecting to a place within self that's infinite, that is interconnected with you and with everyone else. And anyone will say, when they have a true a spiritual experience, a unio mystica, when they get into your world of these terms, when you get to that place, I talk to people I know who do drugs, talk to people that psychedelics, talk to people that have spiritual experiences in other ways. You reach a place, and I've felt this before, of oneness with all things. And would we call that a subjective experience? If many of us are tapping into it, I think it's the objective reality that we're able to reach. There is a subjectivity to it. That's why every prophet spoke differently. Everybody absorbs this experience differently through their lens. But I guess I'm a bit hesitant to say that it's like this. Everyone can have an experience, and that's what to be honest, that you and I have connected a lot over Rabbi Avraham Abulafia from the 1200s, and he really is one of the few that did talk about his experiences, and he wasn't just keeping it to ideas theosophically. But one of the fears was that, and you've talked about this, I believe, is that it can lead the prophet, or a lot of the sages were worried of the anarchy that can occur when everyone is having their own spiritual experience. Where's the objective truth about what we're going to follow? So there is worry there. And I'll just leave it at that, open-ended.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great opening there. Yeah, I mean, there's a term that's been thrown around now among philosophers of either trans-subjectivity or intersubjectivity, which is something of this middle position between the objective and subjective. Because when we're talking about these experiences that don't fit nicely into either box of objective or subjective, we need to find some new terminology. It's interesting while you're talking, it's interesting that you're talking about the closing of the eyes to see, the covering of the eyes for Shema, a very beautiful metaphor. The word mysticism itself comes from the Greek moi, which means to close the eyes, is the way that at least many etymologists draw it back, that there's a sense, tracing back to the Euclidean mysteries where they would close their eyes to see the theophanies, to see the revelations of the divine. But it's a very interesting notion, the fact that Judaism itself bases itself on this experiential moment. There's an empirical moment where the Jews stand at Sinai and they encounter the divine. And that is really what grounds it. This sort of, we can think about this dichotomy between rationalism and experientialism, or rationalism and empiricism. There's very much an empirical drive here. But what you said right at the end is very interesting, which is that when we place the weight of something on an empirical experience, right? What's unique about the Sinai event is that, as you're saying, that it's transsubjective, it's experienced by many people together at once. It's not just one person, but their experience, which is the common motif when that experience is spoken about, all the way from Saadia Gaon to Yehuda Halevi and through Jewish philosophers through the centuries. But the notion that religious experience in a contemporary sense, whether that's the 13th century or the 21st century, may be something of a threat to institutionalized religion, because institutionalized religions rely upon a common shared narrative, a common history, a common nomos, a common law to bind us. And if each person's having their own individual mind-shattering experiences, that shifts the weight of power almost away from institutionalized religion.
And I want to defend that institutionalized religion as well, because I get worried in our generation where everyone I meet says, "Oh, I don't need any outside truth. I'm just going to look within and find it all here." And I don't disagree that all the truth can be found if you are able to tap in and reach the truth. But I do believe when I had that spiritual experience at 16, you better be sure that I also went to study. And when I wanted to know what's the right path. Just because you feel something, I had to learn about the history of an entire nation, to study Torah, to study true wisdom objectively outside of self, and not just say that I myself, because I have spiritual power and I can tap in well, that means I don't have to look, I guess you could say, outside, even though we believe Torah is something that's taught to your soul in the womb, and it's something that's almost can be found within. Like, we know that the forefathers were able to tap into the truth of Torah before it was even given, because they had reached that state. At the end of the day, I think we need to have humility to seek out truth as well, and use our minds and be critical, and at the same time not get bogged down by the mind. It's a paradox. You have to use it all. You got to use the mind, you got to use the heart, you got to go beyond the mind and the heart, and you have to bring it all together. That's what I love. When I think about Moses, when I think about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the same Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the author of all the most mundane, nitpicky laws you can imagine. He was so engaged in the nitpicky part of the world. At the same time, he was bound to God in the most mystical. I mean, we could get into what level he was on. I mean, he was. He says in the Zohar, he was bound in a loving fire with God 24/7. There wasn't any break. So I love the fact, the more I learn about these mystics and these rabbis, the same one who is on an incredibly high level is also getting involved in what do you do if someone borrows $10 but didn't return it in the right time? What is the law? Like, caring about the details and being on those levels is a paradox that Judaism asks from us.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. I think that mysticism has to be grounded. It has to be. I think that there must be an ethical component where we do care if someone's having mystical experiences, and this is very common, and then they're coming back and they're being a horrible spouse, a horrible stranger. Then, like, your mystical experiences can go to hell unless they're being grounded in a real ethic, in a real care, in a real concern. And to I think the real question is, how do we build a society based on experiences that are fundamentally rooted in love and unity?
And how do we let people go on their path and at the same time have a group understanding of something? You know, like, how do we?
These are tough questions, and I doubt that we're going to solve them right here and right now. But if we do, we'll have to alert the media. I'm curious to know. I mean, there's another point here which is coming to mind, which I'm doing some work now on Martin Buber, the German Israeli Jewish philosopher. He has an interesting critique. He had a debate with Carl Jung, which I'm sure many people know, about the nature of God, the existence of God, and it's recorded in their letters back and forth. A very, very fascinating debate. And Buber accuses Jung of psychologizing God too much, making just God a figment of our own imagination, or even if it's a collective imagination. But there's no reality of God which one can have a real relationship with, which for Buber is very important, to have that dialogical, to have a relationship, a dialogue with something that is also outside of us is very important for him. And his concern is that when we make everything just about the internal mystical experience, then there's nothing beyond the human. It's all just us. There's nothing outside of us. It's all, and as wonderful as that is, there's something solipsistic about that. Is it all just in our mind? And I think people that even engage in mysticism for a while and feel that it's very real may come to a point where they feel that it all just is in their mind without that relationship to something beyond the self, if that's language that you'll engage in.
You know, I've experienced both, and I focus on both a lot. I would say it's easier to meditate and melt into the divine and just like let go of self and connect up. But when we pray, when we make a blessing, the most powerful word for me is not God's name. It's the second word, which is ata, you. When you're saying you to God, you are speaking to a being. If so many of us pray 3 times a day our entire lives, and we forget most of the time that when I'm praying, I'm not praying at a being. I'm not just reaching a state within self. You know, you hear this a lot in Orthodox Judaism. Prayer isn't for God, it's for you. It's for your personal growth. It's to work on yourself. God doesn't need your prayers. It's about you coming to a recognition of God. I think, and what I've learned is that prayer and your communion with God is you are connecting to this being. And when you pray in that way and you feel, now what does that mean? to me, it's almost like it can't be said. It's a sense where you feel, and not in the know we were talking about before. There's a sense within you, your soul on a certain level is looking at God, and you are speaking to this infinite being, and you are you are speaking towards God. You're connecting to God, and that is, I think, crucial to the mystical experience. Is that you are going out, like Buber was saying, you're going outside of yourself, and you are creating this relationship with God.
Yeah, it's very apropos because the word that Buber used, I'm sure you know, to describe this relationship is the I-thou relationship. It's
I thou, right?
The I-thou,
Yes.
as opposed to the I-it, which objectifies the thing. So that's very
Perfect.
appropriate. It really is the ata. It's the du. The Chassidish niggin, do, like it's you. I wonder though, with this all this talk of, I mean, because Buber himself drifts from a phase of more mysticism to a phase of dialogue. This is something which has been discussed by scholars for a while already. How do we reconcile what we were saying earlier about the fundamental unity? It's all one. We can't separate between us and God, between God and between the spiritual and mundane. And now we're talking about, no, there is this thing that's outside of us that we're relating to, that we're addressing as the you that's not us. How do we hold the tension between those two seemingly paradoxical directions?
As I was saying it to you, I thought the same question. The mystery of Tzimtzum, the mystery of how God can make space for anything other than him, and what that even means, the deeper you go, the harder it is to unravel that difference. Is it just from God's perspective? Is it just from our perspective, below to above? But actually above to below, it is only one. I think we have to believe, as Maimonides teaches us, just like we have free will, we have to believe that on some level, even though God is all, and there's nothing outside of God's existence, there's still a difference. There's still an us that God desperately wants a relationship with. I think the analogy I love most is a child. When you have a child and you want a relationship with your child, technically, is that child anything but you? Is there any element of that child that's not its parents? There is nothing of that child's existence that's not you and your wife, or your wife and husband. There's no aspect of that being that could be in existence without your two, and yet it's an independent being that you seek a relationship with that can easily run away, and you have to cultivate that relationship your whole life. So yes, everything is God, but at the same time, he has decided to give us our own independent existence, where we can choose to make a relationship with God or to ignore God our entire lives. And when we meditate, when we pray, and we try to reach this oneness, maybe we're tapping into that truth from God's perspective, that we really are just one with God. But you are deciding to reach that perspective. You are taking what could be a separation, and you are revealing the oneness that exists between you. But it's still an I thou. It's still the two of you. It's a tough one, but I'm trying to flesh it out with you as we.
It's very beautiful to watch you try and make sense of that, and I can see you dancing around these ideas and your experiences and trying to make space there. I want to perhaps phrase it, and I know this is a topic which we've spoken about a lot. You know, the sort of the metaphysical space of separation and unity. The Tzimtzum, we both, I'll do a plug for both of us here. We're both doing courses on Kabbalah and Seder Shtalshlut and Tzimtzum, and I recommend people that aren't following the conversation at this point, go and check out both your and my work, and many other great teachers. We're not the only two people that are sharing such things online. I'm curious. I want to bring. There's one sort of very poignant duality within the Hasidic tradition, which is the contemporary form of Jewish mysticism, which we both identify with. If I'm not mistaken, is that right on your end? Okay, good. You're good. Where there's two poles of experience, and I'm wondering if you see any tension between them, or how you see their relationship in relation to our conversation here about the place of experience. So when we speak about, there are many words for a mystical experience within the Hasidic tradition. We talk about hitkalalut, we talk about, but the most common term that's used is dveikut. Dveikut is cleaving to God, is how it's usually translated, which ironically comes, the verse that you've been quoting from Genesis, that Adam knew Eve, the same word there, davak, is Akein Yazav Yeshus Avesame, V'davak Be'ishtay, they should cleave. There's an act
And I
of
always
union.
laugh about the word cleave, because cleave can also mean to separate. So
Separate, right.
I tried
That's
to use
very
a
good.
different word in English.
What word do you try to use for Dveikut?
What word did I exchange cleaving for? I think it was, to bond with or connect to. But anyways.
Yeah. Ledafka, to bond with God, there's definitely, it's a funny word. There's a lot of, I don't think we should get bogged down here in the scholarship. There's a lot of scholarship about whether mystical experiences in Judaism and other forms of Abrahamic religion are unitive, or they're more about being the presence of God. There's been arguments back and forth for some generations on that. Bernard McGinn prefers to use the term the mystical presence of God, which fits well with earlier forms of Jewish mysticism or not. But putting aside the nuances of scholarship, we have this term of dveikut, of some sort of bonding with God. And in Genesis, there's a sexual connotation, there's a physical connotation where the two bodies actually meet and they become one flesh together, the flesh of a child, as you've been saying. And then there's the other side of Hasidic practice, which is this idea of b'chol drachecha de'eu, that in all one's ways one can know God. And there's the famous Hasidic parable of this fellow who travels for miles and miles and miles to see his guru, his Rabbi. And when he returns, his family, they're skeptical of this long trips he makes. You know the story, I'm just repeating it for the audience. They ask him, why'd you make the whole travel? And he said, I went to see how my Rabbi ties his shoelaces. That's what he went to see. And what he means by that is, how is the most mundane possible act that this person could do is infused with an intentionality, a mindfulness, a consciousness of the ever presence of God, and how even that moment can be special and can be infused. So do you see these two categories, this idea of dveikut, which has more of this ecstatic notion, there's rapture, there's being lost in prayer, there's sort of fiery imagery with it. One can forget themselves and be caught up in this rapturous experience of the divine. And then there's this idea of b'chol drachecha, while you're washing the dishes and while you're changing your tire and while you're tying your shoelaces, you're conscious of the divinity, the sacrality, the beauty of the moment. Do you see those as two different things? Do you see those as two different models, perhaps, of spirituality? How do you see that?
Not at all. They totally work in tandem. And when I first got connected, the Baal Shem Tov was till this day, I've most connected with the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who embodied what you're saying to the max. He has a book called Tzavat HaRivash, which is collected writings by his students. Most of these rabbis never wrote their own stuff. But that book is focused on this concept. And you can tell in his writings that in every tree that you look at, and every flower that you smell, and every dish that you put away, and while you're speaking to other people, if you're truly bonded with God in a real way, it's not just going to be in the synagogue, it's not just going to be on Yom Kippur, it's not just going to be at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. If something's real and true, then it will apply wherever and whenever you find yourself. And yes, I think the first level is the first way you said. The first level is to work on having dveikut, to work on reaching a connection with God that you can really feel during prayer, during special times. But if you're able to have a true awakening, if you're able to flip that switch and recognize that truth in a powerful way, and of course work on it every day, that mystical experience you have when you pray in the morning should carry over into how you eat your cereal 5 minutes later. And unfortunately, the way of a human being is often not that way. You have that experience. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement, he discusses this. He says, what does it mean in Psalm 126, I believe, that we say, when in the time of redemption, when the Messiah arrives, we will have been like dreamers? He says, what do you mean we'll be of dreamers? Because all of exile right now, the life we live is like a dream. What's a dream? In a dream, two opposites can occur at the same time. You can have an elephant fly through a needle. You can have two opposites occur and it doesn't bother you in a dream. In a dream, you're like, that's cool, that makes sense. He said, so too in our lives, we're like dreamers. One morning you can pray with rapture, and 5 minutes later you're driving to work and you're cursing out somebody who just cut you off, and you're losing your cool completely. You're forgetting about God. How can that be? I just had a true experience, and it was true. Because that's the way of exile. It's a world of falsehood. We can have two opposites at the same time happening. But the level, don't get disheartened. It doesn't mean your experience was fake. It was real. But the Rebbe Yashab and many others say if you want to know you're really truly connected, is that you can carry that over into your mundane life. You can bring God into how you tie your shoelaces, as you said, how you eat, how you walk. That's what we're trying to reach. it also brings God into your entire day. It's not just into the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that you're praying, but you're developing that connection throughout the day. Maimonides writes that, I think in the book of Teshuvah, of repentance, of return, that love of God, true love of God, is like love of another person, where you're obsessed. Even when you wash the dishes, you're thinking about your love. Even when you're doing tasks, you're thinking about your love. So too, to have true dveikut, to have true cleaving and oneness and bonding with God, is that I'm thinking about God even when I'm watching, the Super Bowl. I'm trying to find ways to always connect things back to God. And I think this is a huge difference. A lot of people look at what I do and what we do in the Hasidic movement in a more modern way, and they say, "Oh, it's kind of like modern Orthodoxy." Or what you're doing is you're connecting the secular world, science, culture, with religion and with God, and you're merging the two. I'm like, yes and no. You want to reach a place of infinity of God, where the secular and the religious, you're able to bring God into pop culture just as much as you're able to bring God into religious life, because God isn't limited by one thing. It's a completely different shift to what we're saying about simply both are true, but we're going to find a way to merge them in our lives. We're not going to let it hold us back. No, it's all God. But I am not going to ignore the secular world, because I'm not scared of bringing God into there too. And it's very risky. It's a dangerous game, because either you're fooling yourself or you've reached that place of true connection where you're able to bring God into it. And I think the truth is, for most of us, it's somewhere in the middle, where we're not totally lost in it, and we're also not reached a place where we can find God completely in everything equally. But we have through learning Chassidut and through studying this, we're able to at least have a glimmer of that truth of Ein Od Milvado, that there's nothing outside of God, and we're able to engage the secular world in a way that we see the truth of God in it.
That's very cool. That's very nice. It's definitely something to aspire to, and that vision that the quote unquote secular world is not an antithesis or a threat to the divine, because if we fundamentally believe that all things are the divine, then there's no antinomy, there's no competition, and we should be able to engage with all things as if they're such. I want to maybe bring out a piece of language here, which is a very cliche word, and see if we can apply it into this context. And I'm doing this because you brought up a text which I was thinking about while you were speaking, which was the text from Maimonides, about using the analogy of the person who's in love with another human for the analogy of the person who's in love with God. There's a slogan, I see it thrown around more in Christian circles and Jewish circles, that God is love. And sometimes we become callous towards things that have become jingles and slogans. They no longer have purchase power on us. But I think for anyone who has had a mystical experience, a experience of the raw revelation of reality, the one salient feature which follows through in that space of unity and interconnectedness and interdependence is a sense of love. And this is really across all traditions, East and West, that there's, in the East, they talk about there's awareness, bliss, and love, the three fundamentals of reality. And we have similar terms in Jewish mysticism and others. This notion of being in a state of love and they're both sides of love, right? If someone's in a loving relationship, there are moments of rapture in that love. There are special moments of being intimate with one's partner. But then there's carrying that intimacy through the day and going through, the real hurdles of relationship. And that's trying to communicate and trying to work things through and trying to build a vision together and raise children together and whatever it is. So this notion that there's a place for rapture, that we can have love both to, and I think when we say God, I think we need to be very careful too, and maybe we should have done this earlier, to differentiate from sort of the old anthropomorphic white man with a white beard on God. Simply, as far as the mystics use it, is the totality of reality and more. So when we say we love God, it means that we love ourselves, we love nature, we love the humans around us, we love the plants, we love we're imbued with a love for all of reality. Beautiful. And the ability to experience that, and then to carry that into our mundane and to infuse our actions with that. This image from Buber, who's just been on my mind now because I've been reading him, and he's so beautiful, talks about how everything that you encounter has the divine in it, and that's a teaching that he takes from Chassidut, from Jewish mysticism, and therefore to see everything as you, and not as not as a means to an end that we can somehow use to our own advantage, but to see it infused with love. And I'm so curious that this notion of that we were like dreamers, right? Hayinu k'chalmim, we were like dreamers. There's both a judgment there, right? That there was some sort of illusion of some sort of place for paradoxicality, but also acknowledging that we are dreaming and we have the possibility to dream our realities. And what would our reality look like if we could dream it on a foundation of love and not on a foundation of exploitation or ego or competition or one-upmanship? But if we could engage in an ethos of love, what would that look like? I mean, to me, that's really the fundamental question here.
A lot there. I am hesitant a bit to limit God, to say God is just love. We know in Kabbalah that there's 10 sefirot, and God is infinite beyond the 10 sefirot, beyond love, beyond awe. But at least to know that there's love on the right side and respect and awareness and awe on the left side. How many times do we read in the Torah of people that had rapturous love only to leave their bodies? They had to have respect and awe to pull back. Moses has a revelation of God. What's the first thing he does every time? He hides his face. He looks away. He's reverent. This respect idea that God is beyond just, I can do whatever I want. It's all just love. Even in a human relationship, there has to be that respect and that awe as well. But I tend to agree with the feeling of love being I would say the core experience and connection that we have with God. I read this week, I wish I had the source in my head. It was from Kabbalah, from Chassidus somewhere, where he says that love of God is the highest way of connecting to God, more than awe, more than a transcendent experience. Love is a real thing. It is the way we connect with God. So that, and especially in our generation, and if only what you said was beautiful, that idea of like, what does it mean to love God? It doesn't mean this being that's far away. God is all, and therefore to treat nature well, to treat another person well. We know Chassidus more than anything else teaches that the portal, the gateway to having any connection with God is to love another being like yourself. That is the Jewish fundamental. Don't stop, collect 200. This is the beginning of your experience, is you have to love another like you love yourself. You have to treat others. That is the first path. And not to be annoyed if people shame you or call you names. That's the mystical path. We know that there were a group of mystics in the 1200s, 1100s, and they say that, I think Rabbi Yitzchak de Menako says that he heard that one disciple wanted to enter the meditative group, and the rabbi said, "My son, how do you feel when someone shames you?" He said back to him, "I don't take revenge. I don't hold a grudge, but it does hurt. Like it bothers me." He says, "Go in peace. Like you're not ready to join us. You have to reach a place where, your ego is aside and you're not affected by people around you in that way." But in terms of living just in a way of love, I think about that analogy of a husband and wife in bed, and the wife says, "Honey, do you mind?" And they're having a great time. They're talking about life and they're sharing their dreams, and it's blissful. And she says, "Honey, do you mind getting me a cup of water?" And he says, "Well, I want to be here with you. Like, I love you so much. I want to be here with you." And of course she says, "Well, if you truly love me, you would get me the water." So God does ask of us to, no matter how much in rapture we are, how much love we have, is to do certain things in our life, to live objectively with what he desires, to make this world into a dwelling place for God. And therefore our love can manifest in lots of ways that don't really feel that way all the time. So that analogy from Maimonides about how to love another person, I think, is a great analogy for loving God, because sometimes that will manifest in awe, respect, humility, doing something practical we don't want to do. And I think lastly, in a day-to-day way, to really, I guess, play off what you said, that is the path. I think we need to bring more love into the world, love each other, love ourselves, right? Torah says, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love another as you love yourself, meaning you have to have love for yourself first. I was thinking about that line a lot. And when people come to me and they're a bit depressed, I say, do something for someone else. And I think it comes to, you could look at that line maybe and read it, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love another as you love yourself. If you love another, you will come to love yourself as well. Not in a toxic way. Don't get lost in a relationship in order to feel love for yourself. But by being a good person and doing for others and getting out of your own ego and living outside of your mind, you will come to respect yourself more and come to love yourself more as well. So loving others will also help you come to love yourself, and loving yourself will come to help to loving others as well.
Word, definitely. I that's really beautiful. I think there's so many gems here that I'm gonna have to go back and watch this a second time or third to to absorb all of the sometimes like when we speak, something is able to speak through us, and I feel like a lot of that is happening. And I very much appreciate that you what's the right word here? That you balance the love with respect. And I think that sometimes love can also be abusive, right? If I'm just doing this because I love. No, there's even and in all relationships. And I think this is one of the big insights of the mystical tradition of Jewish mysticism is that love itself is not enough. That there needs to be gvuras, or there needs to be boundaries, there needs to be respect. Without, and in many times that respect is more critical than love. There was a verse that came to mind while you were speaking, which is from the book of Micah, chapter 6, verse 8, which is very famous verse, and I think this very much takes a lot of the themes of our conversation, that what does the Lord, what does God demand of us, what does reality call from us when we experience it firsthand in its rawness, to do justice, to avas chesed, to act with loving kindness. We have both. There's justice, there's boundaries, but there's also loving kindness. After that, that's actually a second there, and to be humble, to walk discreetly, to walk snua, humbly with God, right? So I think that a lot of these themes that run very much thick through the Jewish mystical tradition and through many of the world's traditions are there to point a way of how we can walk humbly, justly, and lovingly with God.
And I don't know about you, but I feel most connected to God when I read lines like that. Another place he says, I don't want your sacrifices. I want you to be good and to love me and to live right. And that's like a breath of fresh air, because I think inherently we feel we want to connect to God, period. Yes, we're willing to do the physical mitzvot that he asks us to do, but we just want that unadulterated connection. And sometimes God will peek behind the veil and say, I do too. But like, remember, this is what it's about. But yes, I do have all these details that I'm, like, for example, for sacrifices, for a lot of us, sacrifices, not relatable. And Rashi, the foremost biblical commentator, there's a line where God says, Reach nichoach Hashem, that sacrifices are a pleasant fragrance for me. Rashi says, what do you mean? God doesn't have a nose. What do you mean it's a pleasant fragrance? He says, because I asked v'naser ritzoni, you did what I asked. Meaning you don't get it at all, and you still did it for me. That's what gives me pleasure. And that actually makes sense to me. I relate to that aspect of Judaism, where God says, do a lot of stuff that you won't always, you're going to want to do. And that ability to take your love and channel it into like details is a very beautiful thing. That ebb and flow of a soul. You're a soul in a body. Human beings are fascinating, amazing creatures, where one part of us is this infinite, effervescent, transcendent ball of energy. And the body just wants to live for the self, wants to be practical down in the details. And it's this like, Alter Rebbe came to teach us, you're not a schizophrenic. You have two beings within yourself. You are two desires. And I think it also plays off when you said that you like the idea of love and awe, respect, and kindness, that ability of the two sides. I think that's the core of the mystical life. Sefer Yetzirah, one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Kabbalistic books, it says, Imratz libcha shuv le'echad. If your heart runs, return to the one. I don't know if you've talked to your audience about Ratzo Veshuv, this idea of Ezekiel's vision, where he saw the angels running and returning, running in love and returning back out of awe. And that's their whole existence. They run to God in love and they pull back in respect and reverence. And I think for us, practically, that means work on your spiritual power of running to God in love and ecstasy. Do what it takes to reach those peak states. And then if you want to live a life of truth, take that experience and that inspiration and bring it down into everyday life, into serving God in the mundane details, into buying challah and making food for Shabbat. And not only that, says Sefer Yetzirah, the book says, Shuv le'echad, you're returning to the oneness of God. The oneness of God is found in being able to bring the mystical experience into the physical world. And it's beautiful when you see someone who does that. Like, I love to meet some mystic in a cave in Israel. That would be an amazing experience. but I love seeing those that are also able to bring that whole experience into the lives that they live in the world, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe did.
Yeah, nice. Very well said. I honestly feel, Daniel, that we can go here for a long time. And I feel like this is an infinite conversation, which we're going to have to,
By definition, right?
we're going to have to bring to an end. There's the one, this image of taking that energy and taking that inspiration, that passion, that ratsui, which we have been speaking about here on the channel, and grounding it, really bringing that energy back, bring it into reality. I think it's so powerful. And a story that we were both raised with about the founder of our own stream of Hasidic mysticism, the Chabad tradition of the Alter Rabbi, Shner Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch, uniting both of those sides. The Tanya is a work of high mysticism, metaphysics, and Shulchan Aruch is a work of practical Jewish law. How do you, in what order do you tie your shoelaces, right? Embodying the two lights, the Shnei Or is his name. There's a lot, he himself embodies a lot of that. But the story which comes to mind, which is just a story which is an endless inspiration for me, is how on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, he was supposed to be in the synagogue, of course, for the Kol Nidre, for the most solemn prayer of the Jewish year, where we let go of our sins, we let go of our promises, and we encounter where we're fasting, we're in white, and it's an angelic moment. Really, there's no Jew who doesn't know the solemnness of the Kol Nidre, of the Yom Kippur evening, and the Alter Rebbe is not to be found anywhere. He's just totally MIA. He's just out for the count. No one knows where he is. And then 2 or 3 hours later, and the Chassidim, of course, they're all just waiting there. They're saying their psalms, waiting for the Rebbe to come back, and he comes back, and he's dirty, and he's filthy, and he's smelly. He smells like smoke, and they finally find out somehow. Eventually, I don't know actually the details of how exactly they found out, but while the Alter Rebbe was on his way to synagogue, he either heard or intuited that there was a woman at the edge of town who had just given birth, and her husband wasn't around to help feed her, and she desperately needed to eat something, or else she would have died. And while everyone else was, being spiritual in synagogue, there was this woman who was in need. She was in a compromised situation. She was marginalized by her circumstance, and she needed someone to care for her. And the Alter Rebbe went in his kittel, in his white dress, and went chop down wood on Yom Kippur, which we ordinarily don't to do those things, but to save a life, of course, we do. Lit a fire for her, boiled up some soup where it was, and fed her until she was able to take care of herself, saved her life. And that notion of that, while all the Chassidim were in shul, connecting to God and meditating on the angels and getting all holy while they were in their white, what they were doing was spiritual, but it wasn't necessarily holy. The Alter Rebbe was doing something which was mundane, which was mystical. He was doing an act of devotion, act of love, an act of kindness, and that was holy. And that notion of being able to ground the spiritual into the material is so precious. And for that reason, I thank you, Daniel, for joining us here, because I see your work is doing that, exemplifying that, taking the loftiest moments of inspiration, your own inspiration, the loftiest ideas that you've been exploring, that we've been exploring together, and bringing them to the fore, bringing them to people in a way that they can be grounded, they can be actionable, they can be put into care and to love and to respect and to building our world together. We have a lot of exciting work that we have coming out. I don't know how much is under the wraps and how much isn't, but we have some exciting, more documentary things that I'm not sure how much you want to share or how much you want to plug for the future. But I just want to say it's been an absolute, and someone outside as well. And I hope, I don't know how much can I say here, Daniel? What can I say?
I think stay tuned at all the beautiful things that you and I are working on. And there might be a documentary going down in Europe uncovering some of the mystical sages that you and I really look up to, and really uncovering the mysteries of the ancient times. And look forward to a lot of good company.
What do the sages say? That that the glory of God sometimes hides things. Not all secrets are there out on the open. So we'll keep some things hidden. We'll keep some suspense. But I just want to thank you firstly for joining me here for this conversation, which I've been looking forward to having with you. We've been speaking about doing this for a while, but we both have busy schedules, and we finally were able to find it free room to sit down together. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your work that you're putting out, which is really inspiring and really important and really critical. And thank you for your friendship. It's been really wonderful through my work and through your work to get to know each other and to connect over so much of our shared passions. So thank you for all of those three things.
Thank you for reflecting all of that, and it is all the same back to you. It's very it can be a lonely experience as a mystical seeker and educator, and to see another person like yourself who I really resonate with all that you teach, and you're really working and exploring to find the truth and to engage with all these topics. We're very complex beings, and we have a lot of pursuits in trying to understand truth. And I feel like you hit on so many things that I'm also working to understand, and that feels great to know there's another soul out there that's going after it. And this was very cathartic conversation, because I struggle with all the things that we're discussing, that ebb and flow, that back and forth. I've not mastered it. I'm working on it, and being able to discuss it and flesh it out and bring it out into an audience and bring it out. I hope we all can feel that we're all in this together, trying to reach the one truth.
Yeah,
so thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. I really appreciate that honesty and vulnerability. That's really special. Is there any place? This the options I'm going to give you as the guest. You can either plug, and you can do both really, but it's a bit more high stakes if it's an ultimatum. You can either plug something that's coming out, a course that you're doing, somewhere where people can follow you, and that will all be in the description, of course. Or you can end with one final thought and message to the audience. Which is it going to be?
Wow. This is my ego and what my personal desires versus serving the people. Tough one. And at the same time, following me and stuff, I believe will lead you to inspiring yourself as well. But we'll leave that to the comments section. Leave you with a final thought. I'll leave you with a thought. Reb Zusha was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. He was a big Hasidic tzaddik, righteous person. And he says, when I die, I'm not afraid that they're going to say in the heavenly court, why weren't you as great as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Or for us, they would say, why weren't you Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, someone like that? I'm afraid they're going to ask me, why weren't you Zusha? I'm afraid they're going to ask you, why weren't you Zevi? Why weren't you Daniel? Why weren't you the best version of you? And God gives us unbelievable capabilities. And he asks us, on one hand, don't compare yourself to others. Don't worry about other people. You see these people doing amazing things. I gave them certain abilities, certain mind abilities, certain opportunities in their lives. I did not give that to you. Don't compare yourself to them. Just compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And on the other hand, don't ever be content spiritually, not in life, but spiritually, that I've reached my apex. Don't ever be content, because are you the best version of you? Maybe you have unbelievably more capabilities to reach. So I love that teaching more than any other, because it, on one hand, makes you not compare yourself to others, which we do too much in our time. And on the other hand, it pushes us to never be limited, because it's all positive. You can always reach more within and maybe that's what life's about, is simply trying to seek a level one past where you're at, trying to go one level higher always. And it just continues like that forever.
That's really epic. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's a really powerful thought. And I think we don't have to worry about whether we're too breastive or too renewal. We'll be ourselves, and that'll be epic.
I learned that from you. Sure.
And because, there's an episode in, I think it's the Book of Kings in the Bible, where God gives Solomon these two options, to choose wealth or to choose wisdom. And you chose wisdom. So now I'm going to give you the opportunity to share, to plug yourself. Where can people find you? What's coming up?
In honor of King Shlomo, I am a Millennial Rabbi on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and I'm, I have 4-week, 5-week courses on Kabbalah and other things that are already recorded, and there are going to be new ones coming up. But if there are any that interest anyone, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to give you access. And there's a lot of cool projects that are in the works, that just keep your eye out for it, and just engage. If you have any questions, please always reach out. I love to talk about this stuff. Nice.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been such a pleasure, and looking forward to much more.
I can't wait. God bless you.